Welcome to Furious Fiction. I'm Jules Graham, and with me is Mark Mustian, and our guest today, Mark, is?
Our guest today is David Kirby. We're so honored to have David. He's a finalist for the National Book Award. He's published a lot of poetry, but I have to confess, I want to be David Kirby when I grow up. I mean, this guy, this guy is cool.
Good choice, my friend. It's not all that bad. It's not all that bad to sit around and read and write and talk about books with bright young people every day.
I want to ask you, and I may be making this term up, is there such a thing as accessible poetry? Because, like I read Wallace Stevens and it's good, but I'm trying to figure out, well, what was that exactly? And so I read David Kirby's poems, and they start with things like the guy in the T-shirt that says, "I love hot moms," and goes to something deeper. I mean, is that a term that's
yeah, and it's actually a negative kind of comment from some people who think that poetry is a little bit too accessible if you actually enjoy it. But I try to get everything in there. I try to give the reader the full roller coaster ride.
When I was reading your poems, I came back to the thought it's somewhere between a symphony and paella. It's all in there. And you've said that you love order, but you adore chaos. Is that an accurate statement?
Right. You should hand the reader a puzzle. I mean, you could do the jigsaw puzzle for someone and say, "Look," and they say, "Oh, it's the Cathedral of Notre Dame," or you can just dump the pieces on the floor and scatter them around, so you put them together yourself. But to me, it's more like giving the reader a partly assembled puzzle, and then they get the pleasure of putting the last pieces together, and everybody's happy.
Well, tell us a little bit about The Biscuit Joint, which is your latest book of poems. And I confess I did not know that a biscuit joint is a carpenter's thing. I was thinking, well, this is like a ham and eggs, or Joe's Diner. Or
right. Well, there's this faddish thing called the internet that it'll probably go away in a few years, and we'll remember it nostalgically. But I was looking up something else, and I tumbled across that term. A biscuit joint, which is a carpenter's way of putting together two pieces of wood, and often pieces of wood that aren't easily reconciled, a piece of ash and a piece of hickory, but in a way that is so tight and so cleverly done that A, you can't see where the seam is, and B, where the seam is, it should be stronger than the wood by itself. So you're actually making it better and stronger. And I said, boy, if that doesn't describe art, and especially poetry, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Is it still poetry that makes you the happiest?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I live a joyful life.
Because he's written nonfiction. One of the other cool things about David Kirby, he's all into music. So he's written a nonfiction book about Little Richard.
Right.
And tell us about that. I mean, how did you decide to do that?
Poetry is my first love in the literary sense. A few years ago, when you reach a certain profile, people ask you to write about poetry, make statements, and this kind of thing. And I didn't mind doing that, but I thought I need to do something else. So I sort of reinvented myself as a music journalist, and I had the opportunity to do a book on a seminal figure. And I thought, why not Little Richard? And of all the books I've ever written, if they were confiscated and destroyed and I had to start over again tomorrow, that would be the one. I've never had more fun writing a book. And I got to talk to Little Richard. I got to talk to the people who are now, they're in their 80s, and they were there in the 50s when this crazy thing called rock and roll was invented. I mean, what could be more fun than that?
Well,
and
I think people forget about how subversive Little Richard was. If you've ever read the lyrics to some of his songs, it's like, whoa.
Right. And if you put Little Richard into YouTube, the first thing you'll see is him singing and playing the piano at teen parties. But look at those teens. They look like their parents. The girls have skirts with crinoline in them. The guys have their dad's jackets with the big shoulders. And they're swing dancing. They're doing flash moves, and they're twirling around like this because the teenager hasn't been invented yet.
And you've written 32 books.
Yeah.
Little Richard, Shamu. What was the book about the whale?
That's the other David Kirby. That's,
Oh, no.
That's Science Dave. I'm Poetry
Can't you be
Dave.
Science Dave too?
We're mixed up all the time. We
Are
get each
you
other's
really?
checks. Yeah, we get each, and I'll have to.
That
you know,
could be good or bad.
Yeah, and I'll have to send his to him in Brooklyn. Yeah,
That's too
his are
funny.
actually bigger than mine.
I don't know about
That's
that.
too
So I
funny.
want you to give me some moral points here for sending Science Dave
I was saying,
his
you're
checks.
so versatile.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on Furious Fiction. I look forward to your next round of poetry. Everything you do is rich, and I love reading it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, David.
Right.